Captains of Industry, brought to you by Airtel.
Hello and the warmest welcome to this edition of Captains of Industry. Now, 9 years ago, he was elected chairman at Lloyd's. He was effectively an industry outsider and he was asked to breathe new life into an organization that's about 320 years old. He took on that challenge by drawing on his extensive experience in both government and business. Knighted in 1989, our captain of industry today is Lord Peter Levene, the chairman of Lloyd's. Lord Levene, thank you so much for joining us and availing us your time. Let's start off with the decorum, the tradition, the heritage, because I think a lot of people watching this across Africa know Lloyd's, they know your life history, but what does it mean to be a lord? What is Lord Levene of how do you say it?
Portsoken. Well, it's quite different from what it used to be. It goes back a very long way. Lords used to be hereditary, and they were passed on from father to son, and you have this sort of 8th Earl of somewhere or other. Yeah. That's finished. It's no longer hereditary. Those who were hereditary are still there in terms of serving in the House of Lords. The titles are passed on now, but they don't have a seat in Parliament. To be a Lord today, it's very much, the appointments really fall into two categories. Those who are political appointments, where the government of the day or the opposition are allowed to nominate a certain number of people to boost their own presence in the upper house, which is the House of Lords, and then others who are brought in because of their general contribution to society or business or what have you. I'm happy to say I'm one of the latter group, not the former.
Okay, obviously you were recognized for your contribution in business, the extensive work you've played, the role you've played advising government on the defense industry. How do you see your role today, especially because so much has happened economically in the world and in London in particular?
Well, London is certainly, in terms of financial services, it's the world capital. It suffered a bit of a bashing in the last 2 or 3 years because of all the problems with the banks. But I hasten to add, that was the banks. You know, people talk about the financial services industry went into meltdown. It didn't. The insurance industry is around half of the total. And the insurance industry went all the way through that period in very good shape. At Lloyd's we had some of our best years ever. Now what we have to do is to make sure that what happened at that time doesn't backfire on London as a whole, and to ensure that London maintains its role right at the top of the tree.
You've also been the Lord Mayor of London, effectively the 671st. It's a roving ambassadorial type post trying to promote financial services in London. What do you think the biggest issues are today?
Well, what I've just been talking about, the Lord Mayor of London is older than the chairman of Lloyd's. I mean, the Lord Mayor of London goes back 800 years, and interestingly, the present Lord Mayor, and the Lord Mayor only serves for a year, unlike the Mayor of London, who serves for 4 years. The present Lord Mayor is actually South African, and he'll be here, I believe, in August. But the job of the Lord Mayor of London is to promote London as the world capital for financial services, and when you get problems that come up, such as we had in the last 3 or 4 years, to make sure that we are recognised for what we do, and to make sure that around the world, which the Lord Mayor of London does, and which the Chairman of Lloyd's does, and which other people do, we make sure we're selling our job properly, we're selling our city properly.
Is it difficult at the moment? And I'll tell you why. Obviously, we're now getting Basel regulations for the banks, but the hedge funds in London in particular were identified as offenders regarding the credit crisis. And there was just a sense that the hedge fund industry in London needs a lot more regulation. You need to tighten codes in Britain. And then there was a sense that many companies would probably want to move off to Asia and not really operate within a more constrained regulatory environment. So in as much as you're trying to sift through the debris, there's still a bit of unease.
Well, you shouldn't believe everything you read in the newspapers. Hedge funds generally had a problem. It wasn't only in London. The hedge funds in New York as well were shown up to be part of the problem, as indeed were the banks. And as I said earlier, happily, the insurers weren't. But when you're looking at the reputation of a city, of a capital city, of a city which leads the industry around the world, you've got to take these problems as they come and make sure that people recognise the good work you've done. And when there are calls for more regulation, as there certainly have been, that the industry's got to take them on board and make sure that they put themselves into good shape, so as soon as the world moves on, they stay at the top and they're not targeted as being those who cause problems all the time.
Let's talk about the insurance industry. As you said, it became collateral damage for a lot of the problems created by the banks. If you just looked at AIG, for instance, in the United States, what do you see as the role of insurers today in sort of servicing the broader economy?
Well, best I can do is a strapline we had on the Lloyd's annual report 3 or 4 years ago, which said, Lloyd's, where the world takes its risks. The insurance industry is there to enable individuals, to enable businesses, to develop, to experiment, to invest, and to know that they have a protection. You know, companies can't take all of this on themselves, and so we protect them. If you go back, for example, to the terror of 9/11 and the horror of 9/11, the industry, and Lloyd's in particular, paid out more claims on that event than any other in the world. But what were most of those claims for? And I'm not talking about life insurance, the people who were murdered then. I mean, that is part of the life insurance industry, which is not where we are. But a very substantial part of those claims came from business interruption. And not just the businesses that were destroyed in the Twin Towers. Let's suppose you were running a restaurant that was 200 yards away. Your restaurant came out unscathed, but there were no customers left. So you want to have business interruption insurance. So if something, you know, outside of your control happens, you can carry on.
Best practice then, as you're talking about, we've just had recent news of how Lloyd's has set aside above £3 billion, for instance, to settle claims on loan insurance that was improperly sold.
No, I must correct you there. That is nothing to do with Lloyd's. That is Lloyd's Bank, which is a completely different organisation.
I think then let's use this opportunity to just clarify that.
Well, Lloyd's Bank is one of the largest banks in the UK, period. Lloyd's, of which the insurance market, of which only the name is the same, is a completely different business. So that PPI insurance is a problem for Lloyd's Bank. Happily, it's nothing to do with us.
Does it ever impact on how people perceive you, particularly new markets where, you know, we don't really see that distinction?
Well, rarely. I think most people know, and if they don't, then we explain it to them.
It's a pity. Okay, let's talk about managing Lloyd's and what it's taken for you, because as I said earlier on, you came in as an industry outsider, and obviously you had to learn a little bit about the insurance industry, but you knew a lot about business. You were quoted as saying it was very important to make Lloyd's less of a bureaucracy and more of a business.
Yes, well, my job coming in as chairman was not to run the machine. That's the job of the chief executive. But my job is to help to get the perceptions right around the world, and on the bigger issues such as, is this a bureaucracy and not a business, to work with the chief executive to change that. For example, when I got there, one of the biggest curses of Lloyd's was paper. We had so much paper. If you go in the main road outside Lloyd's in London, Leadenhall Street, you would see these people walking up and down the street with great, what we call slipcases of paper under their arm. And I said when I first got there, well, what happens if it's raining and they drop them all in a puddle? When the new chief executive came in about 4 or 5 years ago, he looked at this and he came back to me after a few weeks and he said, look, I've just found out that our back office, which is in Chatham, which is about 40 kilometres from London, we deliver to them from the centre 5 tons of paper every week. It's ridiculous. So he looked at how he could resolve this and then took the very pragmatic step that the van which took the paper down to Chatham every week, he just took it off the road. And said, well, you can't send the paper down, there's nobody to take it. And so we've made changes, and now, believe it or not, we have a trial going on with some of the brokers and some of the underwriters with iPads, which will really take us into the 21st century. Okay,
so you're modernising the business, but have you had to sort of navigate your way through what is tradition, what is the heritage of the company, and what would make it relevant in a modern day? Are those also issues you've had to grapple with?
Well, Lloyd's, again, everything about Lloyd's is different. Lloyd's is not a company. Lloyd's is a corporation in the old English sense of the word, which actually has as its legal basis the Lloyd's Act. We have our own Act of Parliament. The tradition, in most cases, is actually very welcome, because of course the business is run now very differently from what it was 300 years ago. But there are elements of it which are there. There are elements of it where people say, this is a 300-year-old institution. It's survived through the whole of that period. It's now in very good shape financially. It's weathered the storms, literal and figurative. And the fact that people recognize that they're working somewhere. I mean, I found this out when I first joined Lloyd's. Is it one of the best known names in the world? Yes, it's certainly the best known name for insurance. And very shortly after I was there, I was on vacation in Vietnam. And I was in Hanoi with my wife. And we had a guide who was showing us around. I know Hanoi today is still a very, very communist dirigiste society. And this guide who was showing me around as a tourist said to me, what do you do? And I said, I'm the chairman of Lloyd's. He said, oh, the big insurance market in London. So the reputation runs before. And that does a great deal. When I go somewhere and I say I'm the chairman of Lloyd's, I don't have to say, this is an insurance market and this is what we do. People understand it. So I think the advantages outweigh any disadvantage through things not changing, and when they need to change, then we make sure that they do.
Well, the world around us is changing, obviously, and we keep on referring to the fact that we're in the post-credit crisis. The United States accounts for a significant proportion of the business that you do, and we know that a lot has happened within that economy. The liabilities you've incurred from the economic regression in the United States and a lot of issues like business foreclosures, how's that impacted you?
That has very little effect on us. I mean, you're quite right, nearly half our business comes to the United States. But what affects our business there more than anything else is what we're in business for. North Atlantic hurricanes, windstorms, tornadoes, that's what affects our business. Business foreclosures, you know, if a company is no longer in existence or no longer insures, so it's not there anymore. Though that hasn't had a dramatic effect on what we do.
And the changing geopolitical environment, the fact that the Chinas are rising, the Asia's coming to the fore. I know that Lloyd's was given a license to operate in China. What has innovation meant as the world changes?
Well, it's a whole new world, a whole new market. You know, 30, 40 years ago, you look at the map of the world economically, and you had a very, very big blank space for China. Today, it's the second biggest economy in the world. I sit on the board of one of the Chinese banks, which is actually also has a presence here in Johannesburg, China Construction Bank. It's the second biggest bank in the world. And the biggest bank in the world is also Chinese, and the third biggest bank in the world is also Chinese. So the world has to adapt to a situation where things have changed dramatically over a relatively very short space of time. You know, we talk about the BRIC countries, and I know there's a move now to include South Africa amongst those, where Brazil, Russia, India, China, now South Africa, are very important players. And from our point of view, we like to have a wider diversification of our business.